All right. Well, while we're talking about the prophets, Keita Johnson left a question on Facebook, and this was this this was that. How can some prophecies in Isaiah and Ezekiel, etc., how can they have not been fulfilled yet, but those prophets still be true prophets? At what point do they become false prophecies? So I think the question there is, if we have prophets who have made prophecies that haven't come to pass, how are these prophets still regarded as true prophets? I think she's referring to kind of the prophet test, that if a prophecy doesn't come to pass, then that prophet must be regarded as a false prophet. Why? How can we have prophets that prophesy the future? Those things haven't happened yet, but we still regard those prophets as true prophets.
I want to, I think, just sort of roll that back a little bit. And I think many people might wonder, how do we know anyone? So how did we know that Isaiah was a prophet? How do we know that Obadiah was a prophet? And I don't think people understand how. And number two is, there were thousands of prophets that lived. We know that, the Bible tells us about it, and many of them were murdered by people like Jezebel. And they certainly wrote things in their lives, but they weren't included in Tanakh. So let's sort this piece out. The Torah tells us that the way we know a true prophet, we have two passages we're very interested in. One is one is Deuteronomy chapter 13, and then we have a subsequent Deuteronomy chapter 18. And I'll just make this really simple. First of all, a prophet cannot teach something that is contrary to the Torah. He can do miracles. I talked on one show about the fact that this whole talking in tongues in the charismatic movement appears to be, very nonsensical, and it is. But in fact, the Torah is really not that sardonic, and the Torah tells us that false religions can produce miraculous experiences. So I haven't personally been impressed with what I've seen, but maybe maybe I just haven't been exposed to it. But so number one, Deuteronomy 13 tells us that false prophets will be able to do miracles, actually do miraculous things. However, I did not say, if they tell you about a God that your fathers did not know, they tell you do not follow the commandments, I didn't send him, saith the Lord. I am only testing you to see if you love me. So number one, the message of the prophet must be perfectly consistent with the Torah. If somebody says something it's done away with, Acts 10 or whatever it is, it's just done away with, then it's just not of God. I don't care what this person is doing. He can be making a whole cemetery come back to life. If that person is teaching anything that is not consistent with Torah, if he says, I am the way, the truth, and life, I don't think Jesus said that, but if he did, okay, I don't care what he did. I don't care if he went to the pyramids and made every king come out of the pyramid. It doesn't make a difference. It's not of God. God is only testing you. So that's number one. And number two is he has to be able to do things that are miraculous. And they were tested, the people who were purported to be prophets. Now, you didn't just become a prophet. You were in a school of prophets. A person was tested by the Sanhedrin, and they declared that this person was in fact a prophet. Now, a prophet then makes prophecy, gives forth prophecy about events. Most of it has nothing to do with the future. This is very much a Hollywood concept of what a Navi is. A Navi rarely talks about the future. Navi, the word Navi means to speak. He's a teacher. Isaiah hardly did any miracles in his life. I mean, how many miracles? I mean, I don't say in his life, but in the book of Isaiah, in 66 chapters, he wasn't a miracle worker. I mean, there are some, when Hezekiah was healed, Isaiah didn't even know what was coming. God said, go back and tell him. if you go back to Isaiah 38. So we have this kind of Wizard of Oz idea of prophets, that they had a crystal ball, and that's not was the role of a prophet. The role of a prophet was to make the people better by criticizing them. There were prophets like Elijah and Elisha who were performing miracles because it was needed for the generation to repent. So that's the first thing. Number two is that Isaiah prophesied about an event that would happen, an example, where it did happen perfectly. And I'm thinking of course, of Isaiah 44 verse 28, and Isaiah 45 verse 1, and 45 verse 13. And that's Cyrus, who lived 150 years later. So there we see a prophecy was fulfilled perfectly. We read Ezra chapter 1 verse 1 through 7, and there you'll see very clearly that Cyrus was the king of Persia, and we actually have the pyramid, which from the Assyrian pyramid, that actually has all that information on it. So therefore much has been fulfilled. But Isaiah also tells us, let me give an example of a prophecy that hasn't been fulfilled yet. But if it was, then Isaiah would be a false prophet. He tells us in Isaiah 59 verse 20 that a Redeemer come to Zion to those who repent in Jacob. Well, I'll tell you this, if the Messiah would come to a nation that didn't yet repent, that would be a false prophecy. So the reason why these prophecies of the Messianic age haven't been fulfilled yet, although I do believe that I guess there is wishful thinking, but I am seeing signs all around me that are pointing to an end time, a redemption. Up until this point, the nation, the generation, has not deserved the redemption. So there is no full prophecy that hasn't been fulfilled yet, because the criteria necessary for them to be fulfilled have not yet unfolded.